practically out of print, on top of that extremely rare anime OVA collection, Bastard from Geneon, or the now defunct Geneon, I guess. And good luck finding this on DVD, but I suppose you could probably find it online. I haven't checked myself, but I can't imagine it being amazingly difficult, more than anything else at least. Anyway, I'd just like to say I picked this up for around $40, and it was totally worth it. This is an immense crowd pleaser of an anime, despite it being one of those anime OVA series that's based off a much longer manga, and you know the drill. But let me start by just trying to give a quick synopsis here. It is about the dark magician, Dark Schneider, who is the supposed legendary invincible magician, and in a sci-fi fantasy setting where the medieval kingdoms are at war with the four lords of havoc who are trying to rule the world. And in between this is the high priestess daughter Yoko and her, I guess, admirer, or her child admirer, Luce. Now, have all this plays into some kind of epic prophecy that comes about with, and I'm not really spoiling it here because it happens within the first couple pages in the manga and the first couple minutes of the anime, with the resurrection of Dark Schneider and him having to fight off the four lords of havoc. Now, this is not amazingly different from most other fantasy anime, I'm not gonna lie. It doesn't separate itself much in the way of thematic content or anything. In fact, I would actually go as far to say that this has actually most of the cliches within the genre, both in anime and fantasy. But I think the difference between Bastard and other anime of its ilk is that Bastard knows that it has these cliches, and outside of a pervy sense of humor that, in my opinion, actually kind of works in this, it does work with those cliches, and it knows that they are cliches, but it just doesn't give a crap. It's one of those things that just plows straight ahead, and you have so much fun with it that you just don't care. This is an example of early 90s anime making that contains a perfect amount of I want to say vulgarity, but that's not quite the right word, but you get the vulgarity, and tastefulness, I guess, where it treads that fine line where you're almost like, oh man, this is ridiculous, and I shouldn't like this, but I am liking it. So yes, I would classify it as a guilty pleasure, and like I said, I think the main reason for that is it's just so satisfying. The story itself, while only 6 episodes, progresses very nicely, each one being a full half hour rather than a 25 or 20 minute length of other anime series. And despite me feeling near the start, where I was going to be like, oh, this is going to be so condensed, and the end's going to be like a drop off in animation, I don't think any of that really happened. There was, I think, 10 minutes in episode 5 where the animation dipped slightly, but not incredibly noticeably. It was just something I picked up on. And I think the end, and this will be a slight spoiler, but it's nothing too big, so don't worry about it. I think the end, while not everything is resolved, the big bad is ultimately defeated. I don't think that's much of a spoiler here. And you do get a sense of conclusion for it. I think the ending feels more like it's setting up for a sequel than it feels like it's unfinished. And from what I understand, there were supposed to be 2 more anime OVA episodes, and of course all of this is meant to get you to go read the manga, I'm sure. But anyway, like I said, I think it ends really well, which is the key difference between a lot of these types of series. And with that ending, I think this series actually paces itself really well as well. There is 4 Lords of Havoc, and the first episode is largely about killing the first one in Dark Schneider, and the second and third episode are about Gara, the ninja master, and the 4th and 5th episode are about Arashne, which is Dark Schneider's former lover when he was still around before he was supposedly killed or sealed away. And the final episode is about the big war to stop the goddess of destruction from being summoned by these 4 Lords of Havoc. Now, this works really well because it allows you to get a feel for the characters and kind of attach to the characters, or dare I say. And the last episode, again, you think to yourself, oh man, you know what, there's still these other Havoc Lords left, and they still gotta stop the big bad. How are they gonna fit this into a half an hour? Well, that's frankly because it is really well paced, and it's really well developed. The characters aren't amazingly deep. You know who they are, basically, almost right off the bat when you meet them. But I do think this series does a good job of giving them a little more than one dimension and a little more background details than you would necessarily get in another series like this. And as well, the last episode has some awesome cameos that people that come back from earlier episodes that you may not necessarily be expecting or expecting, but it's one of those expectations where you're hoping for it. So it really fulfills your expectations. And the battle, of course, is appropriately bombastic and huge and epic of all that sort. Now, as far as the characters go, like I said, the series, being this short nature, has intermittent flashbacks and the whatnot to explain these characters. And I think it really helps that each episode, even though it introduces new elements as if they were always there, as these series do, it really works. Because usually the beginning and the end of each episode are tied together. Something will happen in the beginning of one episode, and then at the end of an episode, you'll see it again, but in a different situation, but you'll recognize it because you've had time to absorb that information. So it's almost like a rapid-fire succession of info that's being shot at you, but you get enough time to appropriately digest it. And I don't want to give away any examples for this, but suffice to say that you won't be feeling like much, at least, has kind of popped up out of nowhere and is just being thrown in at the last minute because it's being rushed. I felt extremely satisfied in this respect. Now, getting on to the actual action humor itself, this series does partake in many, many action scenes, more than one per episode oftentimes, and if there is only one per episode, it's usually one big one. But it's extremely fast-paced, while the repetition of spells is, verbally at least, can get a little, I don't want to say tiring, or a lack of word, repetitious, but I do think the actual visual effects vary per them, so it doesn't really matter all that much. And actually, I think, to be honest, by constantly using these effects, or not constantly, but by intermittently using these same spells, by the end of it, you see that one spell and you know what it's going to do and you know the exact power of it. And of course, this series does succumb somewhat to the shonen action formula where, oh, this character's never really dead, or he's got one last burst of energy. But I think the main character's massive egotism really plays into that, because it's almost like he knows that he's the main character. You literally actually think he refers to it more than once in the series. And he knows that he's freaking badass, for lack of a better word. And I think that's part of the humor of it. It's kind of meta in that respect. While nothing new nowadays, I think it is more subtle back when this was made, and I think it's more subtle in this show, so it works better. On the humor side of things, this show is pretty pervy, I'm not going to lie, and while normally I despise that, I think it's played out in a very late 90s kind of fashion, where instead nowadays you get this moe shit where little girls will come on and go, yeah, like, what the fuck is that? But this is played more in the respect that Dark Schneider, being the massive egotist that he is, he's like, hey, nice tits kind of thing. And sure, it's crude, but I didn't really mind. And like I said, I'm not really amazingly sure why, but I would have to say that it's probably just the rest of the series is so satisfying. I'm not saying this is high art or high fantasy, far from it, but it is certainly an enjoyable action show that's worth the money if you can find it and worth seeking out. It's only 3 hours long. Regarding the animation, all of it is very nice, OVA quality in the 90s, you pretty much know what to expect, but it is quite well done. Outside of that 10 minutes in the 5th episode, the animation remains largely consistent and largely impressive, to be honest. Especially there's a couple parts near the end where I was especially impressed with the sheer dearth of things on screen. And we're still walking and moving about, and it's not like they were on a loop or anything. Anyway, in conclusion, Bastard, and I realize I'm running out of time here, so I'll wrap this up. Conclusion, the anime Bastard is definitely worth picking up. You can find it. I found it for $40, no tax. That was certainly a great deal for being out of print, and you know what? Even if it was new, it would still be a great deal, because this is just a fantastic show. And it's going to get, not maybe my highest recommendation, because it does have those cliches, but it is so goddamn satisfying it doesn't matter. Being topical, it reminds me a lot of Terminator 2. You know exactly what to expect, but are wholly satisfied nonetheless. And I think that's the way you gotta look at this. This is the alpha prime of fantasy anime. It may not be the best, but it is certainly a crowd pleaser.